Hi, I'm Corey from Venus and Mars Canine, and this is my big fat leash reactivity guide. We're going to start off with the table of contents, so feel free to pause the video if you want to read that ahead of time. And now, my introduction. I'm going to start out by explaining my perspective as the author. I've spent my entire dog training career primarily working with dogs who live in inner city Chicago, with a 2-year stint in a similar inner city population in Portland, Oregon. Leash reactivity is a huge part of my client population by default, and these dogs are often in neighborhoods densely populated with other dogs. Field trips to areas with fewer dogs are not always possible. Backyards are often small and can also be exposure sites to other dogs. A fair number of my clients are large dogs with personalities predisposed to excitement, frustration, defensive behavior, and other factors that can contribute to pulling and barking on leash. The point being, these are tough cases in tough places, and that's the lens that I'm writing from, or that I wrote this from. Leash reactivity refers to a range of behaviors that mainly occur when your dog is on a leash. These behaviors might include freezing, pulling, whining, growling, lunging, barking, or snapping. And this guide will specifically discuss reactivity towards other dogs. There are many ways to discuss leash reactivity, but in my experience with moderate to severe cases, the problem behavior is often so targeted and intense that starting from a place of simplicity works just fine for getting the ball rolling. And that's how I'm going to approach discussing leash reactivity here. The troubleshooting and extra credit section at the end will include exercises that can significantly impact the process of fixing the problem completely, potentially making or breaking progress for certain dogs. And I'm including this here because some people will take the stuff that I talk about at the end, the troubleshooting and extra credit section, and that can be kind of their main lens for discussing leash reactivity. I don't totally agree with that, which is why I'm writing this in the order that I'm writing it. So the initial recommendations and discussion that we're going to talk about here will be relevant for all cases, in my opinion. Why is it happening? Many things can be going on for a leash reactive dog. Play solicitation, and I have an article about dog body language and socialization that you guys can check out too. Demand barking at the other dog for attention, frustration, predation, invitation to fight, fear, defensiveness, space seeking, surprise or startling, alarm barking or alerting, guarding territory, guarding the handler, and I have an article about resource guarding too, and more. More than that can be going on. All of these feelings or intentions are augmented by the restraint of the leash. And don't forget that a dog can be thinking and feeling multiple things at the same time, just like you or I can. In much of dog training, I'm interested in assessing a behavioral sequence to analyze why the dog behaves a certain way in order to create the best plan for changing the behavior. Leash reactivity cases tend to be quite different in this regard for a few reasons. Generally, the behavior is cranked up so high that the primary thing that is going on is that the dog is simply freaking out. In other words, regardless of what the dog was initially thinking when they first started to display leash reactive behavior, there's a good chance that they don't know what their initial intention even was anymore. The leash reactivity is detached from real world happenings. When I say that leash reactive behavior is detached from real world happenings, I mean that most of my client dogs will start our lesson series screaming continuously at a dog who is standing 100 feet away and calmly looking in the other direction. Across many different personality types, you can watch these dogs bark and see that there is not a single damn thought behind those eyes. If they ever thought they were accomplishing something, we have generally passed that point by the time the dog comes in for training. Why does this happen, you ask? I think of this situation from two different lenses, or sometimes it's one thing or the other. One, the leash reactive behavior is intrinsically rewarding, meaning that it taps into dogs' little doggy brain instincts and needs no reinforcement from the environment to get stronger and stronger. For some dogs, it is inherently motivating to freak out, often because we bred them to bark at stuff for various reasons. And or secondly, the sight of another dog has taken on a strong association with stress and excitement. When the training dog sees another dog, the reactivity is simply an expression of emotion. Woof, that sounds serious, right? For this reason, when people come to me and have no idea why their dog is acting this way, I'm generally not too concerned about figuring it out in the very, very beginning. It depends on the case, obviously, but in general. The emotion is cranked up to level 100, and so the primary goal of training initially is to strip away that stress and excitement. Beginning training, management, and matching law. Because of the tricky nature of this behavior, using management becomes an extremely crucial part of most leash reactivity training plans. Management is a term in dog training that refers to setting up your dog's environment to prevent problem behaviors before it starts. At the beginning of a training program, our goal is to eliminate all unwanted exposure to the trigger. This might involve walking the dog only during certain times of day, allowing them to relieve themselves only in a yard or other safe zone, and or exercising them in areas without other dogs. I refer to this as keeping the dog out of trouble. However, this is only a temporary measure that the training plan should guide you out of within a few weeks or months. If you find yourself stuck in a state of strict management, it's essential to seek professional help to provide guidance, as we do not want the dog to live in a bubble long term. But I want to emphasize that this initial strict management is very important because uncontrolled episodes of leash reactivity are very reinforcing to the dog and thus can undo your hard work. I have worked with many clients who are lax with their management in the beginning stages of training, and that has been a death sentence for any chance of long term behavior change. Some people may find this concept easier to understand with a metaphor. Pretend your dog's behavior is dictated by two piggy banks in their brain. That's his graphic that I have up here. There's a piggy bank for leash reactivity and a piggy bank for calm behavior. Every time we do a good rep of training, we make a deposit in the calm behavior bank. Episodes of leash reactivity make a deposit in the reactive piggy bank. Bernstein's matching law says when there are multiple behaviors available to the animal, they will distribute their efforts in direct proportion to reinforcement history. The problem is that one rep of leash reactivity deposits something like $100 bill, and one rep of good training deposits maybe $5 at best. Just a metaphor. Stay with me. So, minimizing the chance for that $100 deposit is important. My friend and fellow trainer Taylor is wants to redraw this terrible graphic that I made just in case you're looking at it and your eyes are bleeding, but I was too eager to record this before she finished, so sorry, Taylor. Over time and with good management and training, the leash reactivity bank will lose money to interest until it is empty or mostly gone, and we are left with a full and strong good behavior bank that drives calm behavior. Disclaimer: if you find yourself in the midst of training for leash activity and this section has made you anxious about accidental setbacks undoing your progress, please don't worry. This is a metaphor meant to underscore a point for those who may not fully appreciate the importance of diligence. If you're already committed to the training process, know that this is an oversimplification and it's okay to have moments where things don't go as planned. Remember, if you're doing your best, it doesn't help anyone to beat yourself up over the occasional whoopsie moments. You've got this. All right, now let's talk about health and enrichment. And look at that cute baby picture of my dog. I don't know how well you can see him, but he's also in this recording. So before diving into any behavior modification plan, ensuring your dog has a clean bill of health is crucial. A dog who is in pain, has chronic GI issues, or is otherwise medically unwell is naturally more prone to displaying negative behavior when confronted with stress. Sounds obvious, but a lot of people kind of don't actually value that. Additionally, it's important to consider mental and physical enrichment, which I have an article about unique enrichment ideas if you're interested. While lack of exercise isn't usually the sole cause of reactivity, a dog with excess energy is more likely to exhibit reactive behavior. Experiment with various enrichment activities such as training games, playing with toys, nose work, cardio, or strength training exercises. Understanding your dog's breed or breeds can help you determine which activities will provide the most satisfying outlets for them. Okay, now let's go over my training plan or the general training plan. My overall leash reactivity training plan has three phases. Phase one, foundations. Train formal skills and proof off of non-trigger distractions. Meanwhile, accidental exposure to the trigger is as close to zero as possible, like we talked about before with the matching law thing and the piggy bank. Phase two, setups. Structured exposure to trigger in training setups only. Structured exposure to the trigger is only happening in training setups. Stage three, real life. Training setups blend into real life practice, and the training is taken into organic scenarios, which is a spectrum in itself, of course. Formal skills, why and how. Formal skills is also known as obedience or trained behaviors, and I'm talking about sit, stays, come, heel, etc. And in challenging environments, you need a training plan that focuses on formal skills because they help you give your dog guidance and thus more reliably influence their behavior. Sounds kind of obvious, right? Well, if I may get on a high horse, I frequently come across dogs who have dropped out of training with other trainers for leash reactivity using programs that primarily focus on a classical conditioning approach, meaning they simply pair the sight of other dogs with food. This will fix the problem in very easy cases that could have done everything themselves at home with YouTube videos alone. Other than for easy dogs, frankly, this training plan sucks. It treats dogs like mice in a science lab instead of animals in a dynamic real world. It does not hold up, and it generally wastes a lot of time, in my experience. I do like look at that or the look at that plan in combination with other techniques. But the problem is when people pay hundreds of dollars and leave only with the look at that exercise. And on the other side of the spectrum, it's important to emphasize that skills taught with compulsion as the primary motivator, that they'll not effectively address leash reactivity either, in my experience and opinion. I often encounter dogs that have been taught, for example, to heel primarily with an e-collar and then essentially punished with a high-level stimulation for attempting to react to other dogs. However, these dogs were never given the skills to help them regulate their emotions. As a result, they may sulk past some dogs until they can't handle it anymore, leading to explosive reactions and potentially even more difficulty calming down than before the training program. When I come across either of these archetypes, I mostly restart their training techniques. Sometimes their prior experience allows them to graduate some steps faster than average, and sometimes we are starting from scratch. Training plan stage one, foundation skills. I use four categories of core skills in most of my leash activity programs. Bear in mind that I essentially have a full-time job helping people perfect these techniques. We want to have all of these skills at least maybe 80% perfect in isolation and with medium level non-trigger distractions before bringing the trigger back into the picture. For most of my lesson series, this means 1 to 5 lessons spaced 3 to 10 days apart before we start spending a lot of time working around a dog again. Motivation. All of these skills should be reinforced with a reward that is most productive and meaningful for the dog based on the circumstance, which is a topic for an entire article in itself, which I plan on writing soon. For most dogs, I will try to use high value food rewards, but I will also, depending on the situation, use toy play, praise, movement, touch that the dog enjoys, space from the trigger, an opportunity to have free time to sniff and explore, etc. I will also use negative reinforcement, most typically with a leash, which is another full subject for a coming soon article. And to be clear, people write books about what I have just tried to summarize in the last paragraph. Skill one, and really this is like skill category one, moving away from the distraction. Key points about this is that the skill asks the dog to not just turn away, but move away from the distraction. And I've heard that described before as a super leave it for this reason. I very much like the dog to be able to perform the skill independently and with a lot of engagement, but 95% of the time I also incorporate using the leash as a swift backup prompt and or as an independent cue. This practice with the leash also creates muscle memory for the handler and dog that very much helps in emergency situations where the dog needs to be forcibly moved away from the trigger. I think that this is a crucial element missing from many, particularly R plus skewing reactivity training plans in areas where accidental situations will happen on a semi-regular basis. Okay, and here are our variations on the moving away from distraction skill. We've got this way, which is an outside 180 turn.
Let's go! Yes!
So I'm going to give my verbal cue and then turn around. Sometimes stepping back and into the dog a little bit helps make sure that they stay on the same side the whole time. And then I'm going to reward by my leg as I walk away. So I don't show the dog the food until after they've executed the turn. Another variation on that exact same skill is initiating the turn with pops or bumps or feathering of the leash, whatever you want to call it, that tactile cue instead of a verbal cue being the primary thing going on. So I like to teach those concepts in isolation, and then down the line I'll combine them, and it's no problem because it's the same skill. The next turn on the list is the body block inside 180 turn, and it's a favorite of mine, except if a dog is a bite risk, like a redirection risk or a really bad leash biter. So you're just going to shorten the leash. Sometimes I'll do a verbal cue like whoa and step into and in front of the dog. And just like with the other turn, if you're giving a food reward, you should do that after the turn is done and you're walking away. And then finally, this isn't an exhaustive list, but finally on my list of examples, we have a call away where the handler moves backwards to create space from the trigger. This can be done in a lot of ways, and it's not always practical, but some dogs really get a lot of motivation out of seeing you move backwards. Okay, skill category 2, we have stationary disengagement from the distraction. Key points about this. The skill asks the dog to mentally disengage from the trigger without having to move their entire body to do so. This is an important concept. Secondly, I like to practice this skill with a formal cue like watch me, but I also like to practice it without prompting. When we practice without prompting, the dog learns to offer that attention and thus self-interrupt the reactive mindset. And thirdly, having a specific routine that the dog recognizes as a pattern is important as you work in real life and need to pull to the side, like if you're caught in between triggers or you just can't or don't want to turn around. Here are our variations. We have a sit stay with eye contact.
Watch me. Yes.
So in that clip you saw I said watch me, which is great. We love prompted attention. I need to be able to get my dog's attention. And I'm saying yes as soon as she looks back at me. That's an important part as well. And I'm saying my yes before I move my hands. That helps with the eye contact clarity there. And then the other thing that you see is I'm in kind of a formal pose with her. That's not the only thing that I want the dog to understand in terms of training, in this situation, but the formality really helps in challenging situations. The way that I'm set up with the dog, they can just tell we're doing something. I should be paying attention. And in this next example here, you're going to see I don't cue watch me. I just let her look at me automatically, and that's a really important practice as well. So we like prompted attention, and we really like unprompted attention. We also have an engage disengage game, meaning eye contact away from the distraction, not position dependent. So the dog could be standing, they could be laying down, they could be next to you, they could be in front of you, just whatever, the general concept of engage disengage. Then we have specifically look away from the distraction into find it or get it. So a little cookie tossing. I'm saying short little baby cookie tosses because I did say that this is a stationary skill. So you're not going to have the dog running all over the place for their food reward. This dog offers a sit when she checks back in with me, but that was her idea. I didn't need her to do that to do this game. And the little food throw, chasing the cookie or foraging the treat, it's just a nice outlet. It can help regulate emotions for some dogs. And then last on the list, this one's a little funky, but I've actually had clients who did like sport and trick work with me and also work on reactivity tell me that this skill helps them a lot with the reactivity just because their dog loves it so much, which is the skill of perching on an object, meaning putting their front 2 feet on like a fire hydrant or something. And then obviously, like, they're going to be staying focused on the handler while they're doing that. Not obviously, maybe, but they like the trick, so they're going to be focused. Okay, skill category 3, pass by the distraction. I feel like I could have something deep to say about this, about like following and whatever, but it's not really hitting for me right now. So I'm just gonna say passing by is convenient. Being able to walk at the handler's side as one passes by triggers is superior in practicality. Variations on this, we have a heel, formal or informal heel, or walk by my side behavior with attention and check-ins. I don't need the dog to continuously stare up at me, but I expect them to be like paying attention and practicing disengaging from the trigger. I often actually train a heel by default in these, like in my classic Leash Activity lesson series, train it by default of practicing so many turns back to back. This started as a nice accidental bonus, but it ended up becoming integrated into my training plan, meaning I'm relying on practicing the turns to be a primary form of teaching the walking at the side skill.
Okay. Good girl. Good girly.
So the most important thing there is that the dog was clear that she's supposed to be following by my side, kind of paying attention until she was released with her release word, then she's allowed to do her own thing. We've also got following a hand target. So this could be a lure. I wouldn't recommend relying on an actual lure for this skill, but I think a lot of people kind of end up with a hand target heel thing because of luring, and then, they fade off of the lure, hopefully, and the dog is still following the hand target. So I actually just asked my friend to demo healing past a distraction here, and the way that they used their hand, you could see it was empty there as they reach into the treat pouch. I think it actually falls into the hand target category, which is fine by me for the purpose of this discussion. That's why I put it in the same category. You can also do a hand touch in most motion past a distraction. If your dog knows touching your hand, as I'll show in this video example here, you can kind of just present your hand as you're walking along and the dog can bump it.
Bump, bump, bump. Yes. Good job.
And then you can also do a pattern game at your side past a distraction, a dog distraction specifically. This is from Leslie McDevitt's book Controlled Unleashed, which I have actually never read, but I think I get the gist of it, and I'm going to show you something that I think of as a pattern game. I don't actually know if it's in her book or not, but it's like that.
Baby, get it. Yay, yes. Get it. Yay, yes. Get it.
And skill category number 4, we have settling around the distraction. All of the earlier exercises that I just listed can end up being very fast paced and exciting. And so this exercise intentionally drills calm. These techniques tend to utilize habituation heavily. And I used to not emphasize this so much because it's not immediately practical for scenarios on the street, right? So if I have a dog jump out at me from an alley, I'm not going to be like, let me get my dog to lay down and be calm for 5 minutes. Like that's just not practical for that moment. But I am increasingly adding it in sooner to my training plans because I want to further solidify that calm mindset for the dog and just really address the emotional component of this situation, leash reactivity. I typically incorporate settling drills for the last 5 to 10 minutes of a training session with a distraction dog present, even in the distance, as soon as the training dog can handle it. And for variations here, we have a boring down stay, which is sometimes affectionately called the long ass down by sport competitors, meaning that it's just taught mostly as a duration exercise. Obviously, we're adding the distraction of the dog in, but like it has been practiced as just a boring down.
You can just walk. It's supposed to show a long ass down, so you can like walk back and forth.
So you can see this dog is actually not relaxed, but it's good enough for the sake of what we're trying to accomplish here. He's ready to be there for a while. He's hanging out. He's not really expecting anything in particular. And then he gets a toy reward for patience. We have place or go to your bed. Obviously really not practical for leash reactivity because I'm not going to pull a yoga mat out of my butt when I'm on the street, but it's helpful sometimes because the dogs just pick it up really fast. They take to the target element, targeting a prop, and so they just learn the skill of that long down or that long settle best on place because they're just really good at place. And so I'll use it if that's what they've got going for them. Then we have a conditioned settle on a short leash. You can teach this in different ways. Um, it tends to be good for dogs with demanding behavior. So I'm not telling the dog to do anything. I just step on the leash and teach them that that's their cue to settle down. I'm not going to give any tips for this one because I really do truly different techniques for different personalities. But I do want you to notice that my body language is really different than in the focus sit stay where I'm expecting the dog to be looking at me. And then I always end with a good clear release cue. And then last on the list we have conditioned settle. You can also teach this in different ways, but I ended up just having a lot of clients that liked to sit on the ground and pet their dog, calmly and have them settle down like that. And that's how we would end those sessions with the other dog across the room or whatever. Okay, training plan stage 2, exposure to dogs. For the training dog's first exposure to other dogs, I typically like to use a single calm dog as a helper to act as the mildest form of the trigger possible. If you do not have a helper dog, using distance in the real world is going to be even more so your best friend, which we'll talk about in the practicing in real life section too. I typically start with my blue heeler Mars as my helper dog. You can kind of see she's on this side of me on the couch right now. Unless I think that the training dog could hurt her in a freak accident where it got loose, in which case I will use my bigger dog, my Dutch Shepherd Cupid. The helper dog should start in a sit position facing away from the training dog. Sometimes the training dog actually won't notice the helper dog when you do this, in which case I will make a noise or say something to get their attention or move the dog around so that they're noticed, and then go back to having the helper dog sit again after the training dog sees that there's a dog around. Different dogs do better either working indoors or outdoors. I will sometimes use a visual barrier so that the training dog goes out of sight, or sometimes I take the helper dog out of sight for breaks in between repetitions. Sometimes we use a huge amount of distance instead, staying in sight but going very far away to give the training dog a break. Oftentimes, the latter situation, I'll have the training dog's handler on the phone or hopefully held by someone else is a lot better of a situation. Um, a lot of times I'm just yelling too, but I have had some cases when I didn't have access to like a good visual barrier set up where the phone is the best thing that we had. Brief exposure is often the best method in the beginning. All of this differs significantly from how dogs normally encounter other dogs in the real world, and that's intentional. Many dogs cannot succeed without creating somewhat artificial of a feeling in these training sessions. Once we begin to see some successful behavior, I gradually introduce more realistic elements by moving the helper dog around, decreasing distance, allowing the dogs to face and move towards each other, and practicing in various locations. I also enjoy training in setups because it allows the dog and handler to feel confident in their maneuvers when the stakes are low. After all, we are training the human as much as we are training the dog most of the time. As soon as the team is ready, we move to chasing down distraction dogs at a park or in their neighborhood. Sometimes I do everything I can to make the situation easy, and the training dog is still very reactive. So, what do I do in that situation? It depends. Sometimes I go back and work on more foundation skills and impulse control in sessions without a dog distraction again. Sometimes, and only if it allows the dog to reset and listen to the handler and make good progress, I will apply a physical interrupter like poking the dog's upper thigh with my finger, popping the leash, etc. Sometimes I will let the dog come forward and bark at Mars from a great distance, force them to turn around for a break, and repeat over and over again until the dog realizes that this scenario is different and they start to realize they aren't accomplishing anything. Tiring the dog out beforehand and even working in heat can help with this particular technique. And again, there's a troubleshooting section at the bottom of this article that includes general life considerations that may be affecting the dog in these sessions as well. Which skills do we use? You want to start with whatever skill is easiest for the dog to perform. For most of my lessons, the easiest skill to start with is their favorite variation or variations of skill one, moving away. But there are certainly some exceptions that do better with stationary exercises, skill two, or moving parallel, skill three. You want to practice all of the categories of skills because you will need all of them in real life, but what you want to do is match the challenge of the skill to how well your dog is coping with the distraction. So if your dog is really bad at doing something staying still, you should practice that when they're kind of on a roll and coping well with the distraction. If your dog is equally perfect at all of their skills, you don't have anything to worry about here. Just switch up practicing everything. After the beginning stages of exposure, a favorite combination of mine is to use skill one, moving away, to create some distance, maybe a few feet further from the point that the dog initially got startled by seeing another dog. And then once we're in a safe spot, we post up to practice skill two. So the dog sees something, move away a little bit. Okay, now I'm a little bit further away. I feel better. Now I can comfortably watch and practice watching and then disengaging and checking in with the handler.
This way. Yes. Good job.
I should have recorded this on an actual sidewalk, but I need you to imagine that both dogs are kind of walking towards each other on the sidewalk. I turn my dog around, get some space, post up like in the grass next to the sidewalk to watch from a comfortable distance. Habituation and pushing challenge. Habituation or desensitization is an element of these training setups when the training dog begins to say, oh, okay, that's Mars, and nothing ever happens with her. I like when this happens because when I introduce a new dog, Mars is now a reference point for my training client. Okay, this is a new dog, but we're doing all of the stuff we did around Mars. Maybe this new dog is like Mars too. However, it's essential to avoid practicing solely with the same helper dogs too frequently, as this can hinder the training dog's ability to generalize the concept of being non reactive around a dog beyond those particular canine companions. For severe cases of leash reactivity, it's imperative to interrupt with a cue or command or signal or prompt after just a second or two of looking at the other dog. This is because severe leash reactivity means that the dog will escalate up the ladder very quickly, possibly skipping rungs to the top of the ladder in a split second. So if you look at this picture here, I've got a ladder graphic representing reactivity escalation. Moderate to mild cases of leash reactivity, as well as dogs with successful behavior modification programs, will climb up the ladder more slowly and climb back down more quickly. Clients typically report after our lessons that they feel more confident at identifying early warning signs and stopping a problem before it starts because of our training. Okay, so in between setups and practicing in real life, I pulled from my friend's article here. Fellow trainer Sarah Sharpino Ward nicely spells out ideal ways to take training from setups into the real world in her article, Navigating the City with a Sensitive Dog. She says, the types of space I regularly use for training in the city fall into three main categories: limited vision areas, large open areas, and protected high ground. Limited vision areas are enclosed spaces like alleyways, parking garages, underpasses, or similar. Ideally, no triggers are present in the enclosed space itself, and the space has at least two safe entry and exit points to allow avoidance of any triggers that do come in so that the dog is never trapped. The space should open up onto a busier area in at least one place to allow for viewing triggers at a set distance. Alleyways are ideal for this, as they naturally have two exits and visually block most of the environment. Choosing an alleyway that opens onto a busy street on one side, with quiet areas to escape to, will allow the handler and dog team to view triggers from relative safety. Large open areas are harder to find in the city but can offer significant advantages in terms of space and trigger exposure. Large sport fields, schoolyards, and on leash parks can give excellent visibility to triggers at a distance without compromising the ability for the handler dog team to move around the space. Large open areas pose more risk than other training areas in the city, especially for dog reactive dogs, as many people in the city shirk leash laws and allow off leash dogs to approach reactive dogs at will. When using an open space for training, it is wise to carefully scope out the space ahead of time without your dog present to rehearse exit strategies if an off leash dog or other trigger were to approach. In addition, I encourage muzzle training for working in these environments. Even if the working dog does not pose a bite risk, the muzzle is a potent visual signal to ward away unwanted attention. And then the last category, Protected high ground spaces, they're raised areas which allow for extremely good visual range into the environment while preventing any triggers from easily approaching. Condo balconies, bridges, lookouts, and other protected raised areas can be extremely useful for city training. The same rules apply here as to limited vision areas. Make sure there are at least two ways to leave to ensure you are not trapped in a tight space with an oncoming trigger. My guide here is already long enough, so I would recommend checking out Sarah's full article for tips on how to navigate getting to these spaces and using them best for training. This is particularly good for people that don't have access to a professional trainer for whatever reason. So additionally, here are my personal top tips for training in the real world. In training setups, I can move the distraction dog around in different ways to affect the intensity of the experience for the training dog, but obviously in the real world, we don't have that luxury. It cannot be repeated enough that distance is the most valuable tool for controlling the challenge level of training. Only get close to the other dog if your dog is staying at the bottom of the ladder of escalation. Orientation and movement. Other dogs walking away are typically less challenging of a distraction. Dogs moving parallel to you are medium level challenging, and dogs making eye contact with your dog and or moving straight at them are the most challenging. Intensity. A dog who is also excited and vocalizing is always more challenging than a calm dog. You might also know that your dog is more triggered by certain types of dogs, so take this into account when you decide how to use distance and orientation in your training. And finally, don't be afraid to ask people to give you and your dog space, and be firm with people who try to insist that letting their dog go right up to yours is okay. Your dog is your own, and you don't owe anyone interaction with your dog. My dogs are dreaming vocally behind me, so I don't know if you heard that. Little squeakers. Okay, let's talk real quick about trigger stacking. A dog who has just had a lunging barking reaction is more likely to climb up the ladder of escalation faster than they normally would. Similarly, a dog who is stressed by other triggers, such as a vet visit earlier in the day, traffic noises, or being worried about being in a new place, is more likely to climb up the ladder of escalation faster than they normally would. In other words, accumulations of stress make reactivity more likely. This is called trigger stacking. It's important to acknowledge the total picture of what stresses your dog out so that you can adjust challenge levels accordingly. Increasing the level of challenge at the right pace is what sets good dog training apart from excellent dog training, and we all mess it up sometimes. In my opinion, this is what makes dog training an art and not a science, depending on the day, because the right path is sometimes best picked by feel. That being said, the biggest thing that generally people do wrong while training is rush things. The dog is doing well, so they throw them into a crazy hard situation and expect them to continue to do well. Don't do that. Challenge needs to be built incrementally, day by day, and rep by rep. Increased challenge for leash reactivity paces looks like, and you should see this list is pretty directly a reflection of the tips that I gave earlier. Increased challenge looks like closer proximity, more direct orientation, longer time spent around one trigger or practicing around back to back triggers, more exciting dogs, and then more real life feeling drills like peekaboo, having a dog pop out, from an alleyway or something. Can the top of the ladder ever be productive? I recommend earlier to try to keep the training dog at the bottom of the ladder as you build challenge, but the truth is that I do enjoy that in my training sessions, we can have moments with lots of perfect repetitions while also having momentary episodes of struggle in between. This way, the dog learns that they can de escalate in the presence of the trigger. The challenging part here is standardizing that formula for the sake of a guide. Little spikes up the ladder actually are okay and possibly are even very productive for the learning experience, but what's important is that the dog is able to recover. For this reason, I describe being at the bottom of the ladder as the goal, since that's how the majority of the training time should look, in my opinion. And beyond the training of the dog, in a private lesson context, I do find it incredibly valuable to have at least one accidental episode of reactivity, which often happens inevitably without the need to plan it, since we are trying to push the challenge level as aggressively as possible to make the fastest behavior change possible. I like for this to happen because I like to be able to coach the owner the best way to handle their dogs in those emergency moments, but that is kind of its own separate thing. When things are going right. In what I consider to be an interim stage, you may also see your dog start to avoid looking at other dogs altogether and or moving away from other dogs. Dogs will also sniff the ground or sniff something to self-calm or self-soothe, which I consider to be a good sign as well. When things are going right, dogs will not only enthusiastically perform their skills when asked, but also start to offer the handler attention or check in more often. And in other words, they are self interrupting their own reactivity ladder, which is exactly what we want. Through this training, you see the dog's actual emotional response to the sight of other dogs change. They get off the ladder. I made that up, by the way. They get off the ladder. We should start saying that. All right, stage 3 of the training plan, the last stage, real life for real. As our setup style training begins to look and feel completely organic, training sessions and genuine real life experiences blend together. Depending on the dog and the environment, it might still be appropriate to continue to make some amount of space when seeing all or certain types of dogs, and it may be appropriate to still reward good choices. For example, if I am walking a dog who really does not like other dogs lunging towards them, a boundary that I think is reasonable, it makes sense for me to keep that dog a leash length away from other dogs passing by us because my dog and I both know that sometimes random dogs will suddenly jump to the end of their leash. In terms of knowing when to reward or not, I use the piece of cake rule. If the behavior performed by the dog was a piece of cake, meaning they didn't have to think or exert effort to do it, I don't have to stress about rewards. It may make sense to give a treat every now and then or deliver a lower value reward like praise and pets. Don't forget that my primary population is dogs in dense urban environments. I work with lots of dogs who live in busy, noisy places that are downright stressful. Training routines that are active coping strategies often require regular upkeep through higher rates of reinforcement in these situations. Because, in other words, fading out food rewards for a dog who is faced with a constant onslaught of environmental stressors simply may not be a goal. For many dogs, though, the training does take them off the escalation ladder of reactivity completely, and you will see them look at dogs with relaxed facial muscles instead of tense and hard staring. You see them start to simply be okay in the situation and not need to be micromanaged from their handler. Ultimately, success will look different for everyone. What is important to me is that the walking routine is practical and that the dog is healthily regulating their emotions. Leash reactivity can be tied to more global behavior problems that need to be addressed before the training can be considered successful. These concepts can also be the key to taking a leash reactivity routine that feels like a band aid solution to truly feeling like the problem is solved. Many of these things have an obvious relationship with one another, so here's the list. Pulling on leash and overall poor leash handling skills. A dog who is used to yanking their owner around and pulling towards what they want is going to be more prone to getting frustrated about not being allowed to move towards a dog that they wanted to get to. Additionally, proper leash handling and being able to forcefully move a training dog away from a problem scenario makes a huge difference when episodes of reactivity do happen. So the solution here is train leash skills separately from leash reactivity drills. In my experience, leash walking is the skill that having a professional coach you in live time is most helpful for because it's such a dynamic exercise where it is also so easy to develop bad habits. Gear. A dog who is further triggered by the sensation of tightness in their gear, meaning their collar or their harness or whatever, and a dog who has too much physical leverage with their current gear setup, meaning they are actually forcefully moving their handler by pulling on them. they're going to have a hard time training for leash reactivity. And so the solution to this one is that I customize gear recommendations for every team that I work with. Next potential troubleshooting category: demanding behavior. A dog who barks at, paws at, jumps on the owner, or throws tantrums to get what they want frequently throughout the day is more likely to generalize that obnoxious behavior towards seeing another dog on leash. So, my solution, my exact training plan is going to differ from dog to dog, situation to situation, but you definitely don't want to reward these behaviors if they're causing problems. And sometimes the training will also require a well timed interrupter or punishment in order to be effective. Overall life structure. Does your dog instantly get every single thing that they want all day besides access to another dog that they see on leash? That could be a problem. Solution: practice confinement exercises like crates, tethers, baby gates. Practice impulse control, such as waiting at doors, waiting for food bowls, waiting to be invited on the couch. Practice structured calm, such as place or go to your bed while you do something nearby that your dog wants to be involved in. So you're doing something, dog just doesn't get to do it every time with you. They might be conditioned to ignoring the handler or ignoring cues. Picture this. You routinely talk to your dog or try to give your dog a command without success, and now they think your voice is irrelevant and inconsequential. Maybe a new person or trainer takes the dog and the dog magically responds. And the simple reason why is that the dog is desensitized to the owner's voice, but not the new person's voice or the trainer's voice. So the solution is good, thoughtful, and consistent training that is integrated throughout the dog's entire day. Another possible thing: no motivation to train. Picture this: a dog is overweight with a bowl of untouched kibble on the floor, has access to any toy he could ever want from the toy bin, busts through your door without looking back at you, and they go outside, and maybe even they go to doggy daycare or a dog park where they go crazy with other dogs and never once think about humans. Guess what? That dog has little reason to give you the time of day. Maybe you're their buddy, but they certainly don't see you as in charge of any executive decisions. So the solution is to establish a relationship where your dog does work for the good stuff in their life. The owner becomes the facilitator of the dog's wants and needs. General anxiety, fear, or confidence issues. A dog who is super uncomfortable in their own skin while outside, jumping at traffic noises and spooking at a bag blowing in the wind, is more likely to have trouble while seeing other dogs on leash, as described in the trigger stacking section. Solution: I may prescribe in quotation marks a variety of confidence boosting exercises such as defensive handler drills, think variations on body blocking, problem solving games such as simple trick training that make the dog feel cool and brave, obstacle work that changes the way that the dog uses their body to engage with the environment, and more. Counter conditioning protocols for other triggers and phobias may be relevant. There are certainly some cases of global anxiety that I refer to a vet behaviorist to discuss treating the anxiety from a medical lens. And sometimes, honestly, it's hard for me to make this call upon first meeting a dog, and I'll often bring up this subject after I know them for a bit longer. Health and enrichment, double disclaimer. I said it earlier, but I'll say it again. A clean bill of health and fulfilling a dog's biological needs are imperative for successful training. Social skills. Greeting, coexisting off leash, and playing with other dogs is sometimes part of our plan, particularly with young dogs and dogs whose confidence has room to grow. And we'll work on direct social skills only with helper dogs that are trustworthy, socially skilled themselves, and matched to the training dog's temperament and needs. And then there's an other category. Sometimes unique adjustments to handling scenarios or a dog's life can make a big difference. If you can't tell by the incredible length of this video or article, dog behavior can be complex. In conclusion, I fully intend to make a part 2 here where I have more video examples and case studies because this is long enough without having a bajillion examples to get through before you can see the end. And also, I just left a role at a facility, and so now I'm working on my own. I'm going to be working on getting new videos of my new clients and hopefully organizing them nicely so that they make sense for you. It can be a little tricky when you're working with leash reactivity or training in general. You know, sometimes the stress is high, the owners are dealing with a lot. It can be weird to be like, hey, by the way, can I record this? So wish me luck. But anyway, if that's my intention, well, just in time for Cupid to wake up here and do a big stretch right next to me. Um, anyway, in conclusion, because leash reactivity is so emotional for the dog, it can often be incredibly emotional for the human as well. So, anytime I'm working with a challenging behavioral case, I want the human to feel as good as possible, not just the dog. I don't like to harp too much on people for acting anxious because, as a person with my own mental health issues, I know that that doesn't help you feel less anxious for people to be just like, you need to be less anxious. But it is true that your feelings run down the leash. So take care of your own mental health the way that you best know how to, and you got this. And if you don't got this, that is what the professionals are here for. In leash reactivity lessons, it can be hard to juggle time practicing drills and skills versus all of the good and valid questions that owners often have. So I hope that this guide helps you understand some of the ins and outs of how this all works. And for those who cannot train with me for whatever reason, I hope this guide does you good, even standing on its own. I'm available both virtually and in the Chicagoland area for private and group training. And if you have any burning questions for me after watching this, please let me know. Goodbye. Happy training.